All right, there we go. Yeah, so we live right now. So right now I'm with spiritual level of being. Bishop Nathan of the Gnostic Union is here with me tonight, early morning, I guess you could say, about to be. Before we start, Nathan, tell everybody exactly where they can find you at. Like, what are your social handles where they can watch your videos and so on and so forth.
Well, they can find me on YouTube, which is where I do most of my business, Spiritual Level of Being, which is in the title. You can also find me on the Gnostic Union. I'm a bishop there of the Gnostic Union. And we also have here with us also Bishop Tyrone, and we also have Bishop Lorenzo. We also have Bishop Jason Jones, but he's mostly stepped back and he's still a wonderful man. We have Bishop Randall, and we've also had like a slight split, so we still recognize each other, but we have Bishop Bill and Jody on another side of things. So yeah, but separate organization, recognizing each other. So you can find me there on Gnostic Union, on YouTube as well, and on Facebook, and Facebook as well for Spiritual Level of Being. I do TikTok, but that's my shit and gig account. I don't really use it much. I like YouTube and Facebook. So that's where you can find me.
Right on, right on. So we've known each other for almost 3 or 4 years now. And
Yeah, at
we've
least. Yeah.
had plenty of discussions. I mean, you can tell from the very earliest of our videos and discussions that you can see that we know what we're talking about, but we really don't know how to present it as much as an interactive type of thing. But we've learned over the years. And the reason why I asked you today for a discussion was I wanted to know from your perspective, from a Gnostic perspective, where did these gods come from? Okay. So I've been doing my research on a lot on, God's period from, the Indus Valley civilization, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Mesoamericans, Native Americans, you name it. I've been trying to figure out the mythologies, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Australian Aboriginals. I've been talking to you about that personally because you're in Australia, so you are hands on grounds on boots on ground type of individual with that aspect. So of course I've came to you on that level, and I'm very very knowledgeable on two things that I think that I feel like I'm knowledgeable on. One is the Bible, and two is Sumerian mythology. I think the reason why is because I tried to figure out and try to verify everything everybody said, so I know a whole realm of individual information on, especially the Sumerians. Um, and of course, with the Bible, because the Bible, Sumer, and Shinar mean one and the same thing. It's just obvious that you know, trying to figure out who these gods were. So I wanted to ask you personally, from a Gnostic perspective, where do you think these gods came from? Because obviously you believe, or I'm not going to say you believe, I know you understand that there are more than one God. Your belief is something different, which you'll probably expand on, of course. But we both know that there are obviously an indication of what would be described as multiple gods, or at least a god with multiple personalities at the bare minimum, right? Which would probably give the idea of a different god if it is just one god. So where do you think these gods came from in the first instance? Because we know that heaven is not here on planet Earth, it is outside, which means it has to be extraterrestrial.
Well, before I answer all of that as well, I want to mention great title as well, because not all religions have gods, and all religions and spiritualities have evolved over time. So most people hear the word God or gods and they think of Zeus, Yahweh, Shiva, and temples and religious texts, but the origins of the gods go back much further than this, and much older. So the earliest evidence we have that is accepted universally amongst scholars of humans possibly imagining spiritual beings or even gods dates to at least 40,000 years, but it's very likely older. That's just a canonically accepted term within archaeological evidence, in a sense that is not debunked or not debated. So we have origins that go back much further. So we have the carvings like, say, Venus of Holfast, which is not actually to do anything with the Venus goddess. This is just a name. So this was carved from mammoth ivory, possibly 48,000 years ago and even older. And it depicts a pregnant woman figure. So this could possibly be a goddess, a fertility symbol, or even Mother Earth depicted in a goddess form, as goddess worship is really just actually nature worship in its true form and essence. We also have the Lion Man, which is carved from mammoth ivory, dating to 40,000 years ago, which some scholars believe to be either a spirit guide or a shape-shifting spirit, which depicts a man with a lion head, so half human, half lion. And I believe, like many scholars, that this will evolve eventually into the half animal, half god hybrids, if you will. We have also found a seashell necklace, which has got carvings in it, which was possibly used in some form of shamanic ritual or possibly even just jewelry, which dates to 120,000 years ago. We have burial sites which date back to 100,000 years ago and even older, of Neanderthals depicting some form of pre-Homo sapien religion or spirituality, even burying them in circles or with objects. So the twist is, because we also found cannabis and even psychedelics in some of these burials, I don't think the gods really started just from divine revelations or spiritual experiences that we recognize today, but rather with a mix of symbolic thinking, chemical alteration, if you will. And by that, I mean with experimenting with psychedelics, cannabis, and fasting, and also said brewery, as they also had psychedelic alcohol, which would also be used in different periods of times, which I believed out of these mind-altering experiences or hallucinations shaping the idea of supernatural beings. So rather than an unexplained awakening, I'm rather suggesting the origins of gods as a psychochemical evolution. So with an altered state of mind mixed with fear, death, or dreams, sex, and nature itself, this birthed the concept of what we see as divine entities or spiritual beings or the many gods of this world. So we have evidence that goes back to roughly 50,000 to 30,000 years old, with human burials being buried with some form of goods and also cannabis, psychedelics as well, alcohol. So that indicates some form of afterlife in a belief, as you wouldn't be attempting to bury stuff to take with you otherwise. So astrology as well, farming, this would have a huge impact on religions and later the gods itself, and goddess worship, I believe, revolving from around women growing hemp, and while spirit guides would evolve from the male hunting groups and including both male and female shamanic rituals. So we find religious and mystical names even for magic mushrooms, such as the flesh of the gods, even found in Sumeria, and symbolically shaped like penises, representing the god's penis even. And cannabis, the sweet-smelling fragrance of the goddess even, and the burning bush in some lore, or the forbidden fruit, the tree of knowledge. And cannabis was also used for childbirth. We have found young girls, which would be children by our states or teenagers, that weren't ready to give birth, that have died, and they found cannabis inside their private parts to stop the swelling. And I have a text here, which is also from the book History of the Goddess, from the Ice Age of the Bible. It's from Edward Dodge.
See, that's what I like. That's what I like, is that, you know, a lot of people will hear that and won't necessarily like what you said, but you brought a book that you've read. Now, that's not something that you went to go seek, right? That's not something you went to go say, hey, I wonder if this happened. You read, the book was interesting to you. It had an introduction, just like we know how Amazon has introductions for every book, Goodreads and all these other places, you know. And you're like, oh, that's an interesting book. Let me go read this book. You go read this book, and then you find something that nobody else is talking about, which you just shared, which is interesting. Because, you know, the idea that a lot of our information is being hidden from us, I don't believe. I don't believe information is being hidden from us. I think lazy people are saying that, because the information is clearly out there, because eventually somebody's sharing what is out there. It's up to you to go out there and be like, okay, now I got to go get this book myself. Like how, like you just shared the book. So everybody that just heard what you said and seen you share that book, anybody that said that's not true, who hasn't read that book, doesn't understand why that is put in the book in the first place for you to understand. They're just saying that because they don't think they're saying that for the reason that for one or two reasons. One, they weren't the first person to come up with this information, or two, it doesn't go with their narrative. But what is your narrative? Are you having a narrative for facts, or are you having a narrative feel good? And that's a lot of problems in this world, is that people are looking for things to make them feel good inside. Okay, whether it's morally or just integrity, people want to feel good, right? That's why people say, always be respectful for people, or be moral. Like if you found a couple of $100 on the ground, what would you do with it? Well, some people's morals would be like, I will go pay off bills that I owe, right? Because I found it. And some other people's morals would be to turn it into where the establishment where it was dropped at, right? But God sends blessings in different ways, right? Somebody else's downfall is somebody else's blessing. That's just the way it is. You
The
have to give
duality.
and take. That's the duality, exactly the duality of the scale. So because something good happened to you, something bad had to happen to somebody else. It's just the way it is. It's how it counters the balance of who we are and what we are as a species of humans and an individual, and even a group of species just on this planet. You know, um, I always like it when people share sources, because now you're telling me this book, from what I see personally, you're saying, hey, I know this because I read this book. Well, I didn't know it then, but I know it now. Now, if I want to know more, guess what I got to do? I got to get that book. And that's the only way I'll be able to counter what you say. So if somebody wants to counter what you would say, they would have to read that book first and say, hey, this is why this is wrong. And I know as a scholar as you are, you would be like, okay, I'll take that into consideration. But that rarely ever happens to us. People will talk negative before they even try to educate. Well, you need to do more research. Well, okay, I did more research. I read this book. Have you read this book? No, I haven't read this book. So who needs to do more research now? You know what
Pretty
I
much.
mean?
Well, this book has the source of it because this text here is from Egypt and it's in 150 BC when it was written, and it states here it's only a bit of a text, so Ebers or Ubis Papyrus 821, which is the number of it, so you can look this text up. So these texts do exist as well. There's two cases of them. This is one of them. So the other one might have been Greek, or it might have been in the Jewish regions where they discovered it, or it might be Egypt as well. But here's the text. Another to cool the uterus and eliminate its heat. Cannabis ground in honey introduced into her vagina. This is a contraction. So this was to cool down the swelling. And this was done before the Iron Age, before the Bronze Age. This was done in early human era of our civilization when they started farming, when they start growing, mixing with chemicals, or not chemicals, mixing with plants, just experimenting. So we had to experiment to get where we were. That would have been seen as technology. So even the act of religion in itself is a kind of technology in a sense. And why I'm going to mention that, it's an ascension technology. It's not really technology in a thing, it's an idea. It's an idea to ascend. It's a vehicle. So a vehicle to be pointed towards a god or deity or the highest good. So that's the point of religion. So it was about ultimately, depending on what sect, or because we always have different sects from religions that was split, so different tribes had their own beliefs, it would be either in an attempt to awaken the spirit, to say return to an afterlife or go to an afterlife, return with the loved ones, or to appease the gods. So famine, try to calm that down, for instance. Let's do a sacrifice. We have low crops. Let's do a sacrifice and honor the gods to get better crops next year. You have all this sort of stuff playing in mind as well. Another thing is early human warfare. We see temples also being destroyed, and before temples, we had relics even being taken from other tribes. That was their gods. So it's like, hey, we conquered you, we have power over your god. And we even have, say, early battles of afterwards, the aftermath of the battle, a temple would be ransacked and a shrine would have a toilet placed next to it. Though the toilet wasn't actually used, it was symbolic to say, hey, your God's shit, which is hardcore. So a lot of crazy things happen. There's actually an account of that in the Old Testament or the Jewish Bible. I forgot exactly which verse, but it mentions about, I believe it was a shrine to Baal, maybe, that they turned into a toilet seat, but they didn't really actually turn it. They just put it next to it like a latrine. Even the black cubes that have in Mecca, the little stones that they kissed, they too were also used in one stage as a latrine. So people were putting their butt cheeks on there to take poos and all that sort of stuff. That was to insult them. Then later on, the Muslims would buy back them stones and place them back on the relics. So this was a common practice of the ancient past of stealing their holy relics or their gods and then asking for a tribute, which they would pay large amounts to receive back their stolen gods.
Yeah, that
Because
sounds
otherwise
like
it was seen as it would bring famine.
yeah, that sounds like the what is it? Jesus, it's just on the tip of my tongue. The Knights Templar when they were protecting the relics and stuff like that. And then there's another group that was trying to take them. I think it was the Vikings, if I'm not mistaken, would take them and sell them back to the Knights Templar. I don't know. I have to look that up. I think that's what
Muslims
it
as well,
was.
because mostly Templars were fighting against Muslims. So, but there were times the Vikings would do raiding and sell back those holy relics to Christian kingdoms and also Muslim kingdoms, because Vikings were raiding everyone. Like there was a ring that they found because it says Allah on it. Some Muslims were, the Vikings were Muslim. They were Muslim. No, that Viking raided your temple and took that golden ring and went home and said, look what I got, buddies. I got this golden ring. I took it off this monk or I took it off this priest or I took it off this guy before I ransacked his house. And, that's how it was back then. A lot of raiding went on.
No, you're right. You're right. So I just looked it up. So you remember I was telling you about ChatGPT, and I bought the little $20 thing a month just to test it out to see how it is. And I know I read it before. I just can't remember which book I read. I probably read it in one of my Viking books. I'll just have to go back and look at it, of course. But the idea that the question that I said, did Vikings steal religious relics and sell back to the Vikings? And that is something that actually happened. The Vikings would steal religious relics, and the knights and the
Templars would buy it
hold on.
back. Even Christian
The
kingdoms.
Templar. Yeah, I said that sentence wrong. I said Vikings and Vikings. I meant to say Templars. But yeah, I was looking at the wording on the screen. But yeah, they did sell it back, and it was pretty interesting that I know I read it, and I know it's either in the Vikings book that I've read or the Templars book that I read it, because I read them both back to back, and I'm pretty sure it's one of the two.
Yeah, and it happened way before Vikings too. Other kingdoms and even tribes were doing it to each other. It's hard to say, but it's possible even when religion started, these events happened too. It's very hard to say. So, and it wouldn't just include gods, it would also include holy relics. Sometimes even mirrors were fought over because they believed they had a mystical power. And that was just basically an amethyst stone, or whatever you call it, the black stone, and you can see your reflection. They were seen as basically having mystical powers and even possibly being holy, or even from the gods, because you could see your own image. And that could be where maybe God created us in his image comes from. Maybe. Who knows? No one really knows. So a lot of borrowing went on as well with tribes, intermarrying, and also with kingdoms and city-states as well, and borrowing of legends and oral traditions. Judaism did this, Christianity did this, Islam did this too. The infancy gospels, what we were discussing before, which mentions the story of Jesus playing with sparrows, or in some accounts doves, and he turns them into living creatures and they fly off. Muslims will steal this or borrow it, depending on what your view is. This will be done during persecution of Gnostic Christians by Muslims, and that's borrowing their traditions, taking it, because not all Gnostic Christians really actually converted into Islam, for instance. We also see the same with Catholicism. We see Gnostic myths carried on into Christianity. So even with Manichaeism, we find bits of its elements within shamanic religions in Asia that carried on. Shamanism being very ancient, very ancient. So this would go back to the beginning, shamanic rituals, obviously. This is where the idea of honoring gods would come from. This was where it would begin, through these shamanic rituals, or at least to have a discussion with a deity or to witness a deity would have arose from that event, from those shamanic rituals. So I personally do believe that people had these insight spiritual experiences, but we have to take into account that they were done under psychedelic experiences, cannabis use, and also fasting. Also, what we would see around us with nature, life, death, rebirth as well. It's very likely some Neanderthals possibly believed in reincarnation, or early humans did, possibly very likely being the oldest religion. We had ancestor worship as well. That's another ancient belief. Say the Druids believing their gods were their ancestors, which is we find also in some African tribes, that their gods, their ancestors, that in turn could impact the elements. So even the belief with the mention of the Lion Man possibly being a spirit guide, being half animal or human, or even some shape-shifting monster even. This is what would delve into demons, spirits, evil spirits, as we do find duality, especially in early religions as well. Say Zoroastrianism as well. So Zoroastrianism, we have light and darkness, Gnosticism as well, duality in some forms of full battles of light and darkness, and in Judaism. We also find it in Christianity. So apocalyptic religions, if you will, as well. Some sort of event, catastrophe that impacted one person's way of thinking. In the case of the Jewish faith, the Babylonian exile and Roman control would also impact these periods of apocalyptic belief. And in turn, that would carry on with Judaism and Christianity. So with Christianity and Islam, as they would transition from these faiths. So very interesting. Now, some people go into, say, 2012, when they believe the Aztecs were talking about the world ending. No, they were talking about a new era. This is another thing too, because they would worship the cycles. So winter solstice, for instance, I think that's how you pronounce it properly. So people would worship the seasons as well, or the gods at least, that were believed to be associated with those seasons. We even had the belief of gods having their own jurisdiction. So either having power during a certain season or in a certain city. Thus, a city was named after a certain god. This god rules here. This god rules over here. So we had the belief of, or an acceptance of, other gods. But it doesn't mean that these people worshipped them. Even with the case of early Judaism, pagan Judaism, we had the belief of multiple gods, but the worship of one god, either being El Elyon or Yahweh, or sometimes even both, which is very interesting. You want to share any thoughts too, Tyrone?
Yeah, that's interesting to me because like I said, in one of those books that I read, I can't remember which one. I know that the Vikings, their timeline doesn't necessarily line up, of course. But I read in one of those books, and the timeline is only off maybe 50 years. So that's give or take, right? We know nothing that happens just spontaneously. It takes many years for it to develop before it gets to the point where people recognize it, right? And I give a good example of that. You've been doing your YouTube for about 4 or 5 years. I've been doing mine maybe about the same time, but not really, consistent with it and really, paying attention to it just until maybe just a couple of years ago, right? People didn't really notice me until I started advertising who I was, just like you do, right? It's all about advertising who you are, right? And that takes time. That takes time to build up, right? So 4 years from now, I'm still not at the point where I feel like I'm at the level at where I feel like people are asking me to come and do podcasts for them, right? Like I'll always have to reach out to do podcasts to other individuals unless somebody watched me on somebody else's podcast that I had a friendship with or something like that. But it's never like, oh, I got to talk to this individual. And it's not that I'm trying to shoot for that. Is what I'm saying is that let's just say 2 years from now, I'm being asked, hey, can you fly out to this place and speak at this convention? Which I do want to speak at one convention at one time because I feel like I meet different goals in my life. When people say I can't do something, I usually strive harder to reach that goal, right? I think that's what most of us is. Um, but what I'm putting this is as a personal experience is to understanding how religion and how these things can be pushed is that it takes people with consistency to push this so it doesn't just happen. So yes, even though the Vikings and the Knights Templar probably didn't really interact what we understand in our timeline, we don't know when who was officially announced at that time. A lot of people still consider themselves Vikings of today in 2025. So how can you say that they ended at a certain time when people today even consider themselves Vikings, right? Because they can trace their bloodline to certain individuals, right? And timelines and where they're at. So how can you say a group of individuals really disappeared? Did they really disappear, or is it the knowledge of those people that disappeared, right? And that's for anybody: the Mayans, the Sumerians, the uh, the Australian, the Aboriginal Australians. I mean, this is anybody, right? Is it really? Did they really disappear, or is it the knowledge that they knew of who themselves were disappear? And there's only a small select group of people that understand who they are and where they came from. That's why you have what is considered as what we know as what we say ancestors or elders because they have that true knowledge, right? But I bring that up for this reason because you know, a lot of what we share comes from what we've read. I've always said this. I can't read every single book in this world, and you can't read every single book in this world. But when we come together as individuals who truly want to understand and seek knowledge, we work with them. There are a lot of people out here who will block people because they don't like what their personality. So you're choosing that you dislike their personality over the information that they have. I don't care if I hate your guts. If you have information that I might need, I can't block you because I'm only blocking my own knowledge, my own ability to gain knowledge. Why would I want to do that? Now I'm choosing my ego over what is truly what I'm trying to portray to people when I hear people say, yeah, I really want to just get to the bottom of this. I want to know the truth, blah, blah, blah. But does the truth come with a price tag? And does the truth come with an ego? Because in my case, it doesn't, right? It comes with me trying to understand what everybody says. You can hate me all you want, and I can hate you all I want. But the knowledge between us is what matters the most because guess what? Our primary and foundational beliefs is that we want to understand the truth. And because you can't do everything and I can't do anything, we have to, by natural means, to work together to understand it. Now we can go ahead and be separate, but we can understand that our knowledge might help us bring us together, which a lot of people don't understand that. But it's always about ego and stuff. And that's why I say, when people come up with these timelines, because you know, I promise you, I cannot remember which one of the books that I've read, but I'll be going over it in the future because I have that series on my website or on my YouTube channel. What I've learned from reading these books, I go over every book. I definitely marked it in one of those books, and I read like 6 or 7 Templar books, and I want to say I probably read about the same amount or maybe less Vikings. I probably read maybe less Vikings, but I read them back to back. So I read like a Templar's book, then I read a Viking book, then I read a Templar book, then I read a Viking book, and this was about like a year and a half ago. And I know that, and I understand it because I had a disagreement with an individual where he was telling me that um, it had to do something with Oak Island, and I can't remember what the actual discussion was about, but I told him that you know, uh, there's a lot of mystery out there that a lot of people don't understand because these timelines are given by people who want to create a narrative for their belief, not what's facts, but a narrative for their beliefs. So they pick the happy medium that makes them feel good.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: so where do you think the ultimate God came from?
Well, the ultimate God in mice little eyes, I guess you can say, with some ego here ahead, but all those are on a theological standpoint. I would say the Most High, and I would say that's the law and order system of all things. Energy itself. You can even argue consciousness plays into all of this too, but the supreme order, and that's why you have text stating that God is unknowable, knowable through spirit. But that's your own primitive, limited knowledge of the said Supreme Most High. So this is found within all things, depending on your construct of it. This can go back to the monad or monas, being the absolute and the all. So nothing existing outside the mind of God. This is my idea of the Most High, where it coming to be through our understanding of consciousness, philosophy, theology, the evolving of it, coming to understand, seeking within, and realizing there's something higher than us and above our limited understanding than just mere man-made statues of a deity to worship, rather something above that, something that we did not create, that has always existed. So some can call that the universe, but however, this universe might have had another universe before that, and it could have universes within this universe, as we don't really ultimately know. So I'd say the system of all things, what brings into being. This is the idea of God, something that you can't really argue, or at least argue against. You can't disprove it, and you can't fully prove it. But again, to come to know these events, we had to go through a personal spiritual experience, which is what Gnosticism is also about, what we promote, a personal spiritual experience. So the part of you that you understand, or the part of God that you understand, is you, technically. It's part of you. So again, that's what I meant by a limited understanding, because it's your understanding. So something beyond even that. So with these personal experiences, they did begin out of psychedelic experiences, out of use of cannabis, even fasting, spiritual retreating. So something in regarding to Vikings too, they also used psychedelics, and with mentioning about some people want to pick what makes them feel good. Well, Vikings also sacrificed. People like to ignore that. People will say, I want to be Viking. Well, they would laugh at you because you're not doing human sacrifices, or you're not regularly sacrificing animals. So beliefs change. Now, one thing they have in common with, say, the Canaanites and indeed many other early religions was tent dwelling, filling it up with smoke, cannabis smoke, receiving visions from the gods or from God. It's argued possibly even Moses was one of these shamanic people that would fill up the tent with smoke. The Hiskos, the Shashu of Yahweh, and the Hiskos of El, they too would also do these rituals inside tents filling up with smoke to have a communion with God. We have found burnt cannabis next to shrines dedicated to both Yahweh and his wife Asherah or Asherah, that the priest would inhale to receive divine insights. Vikings did this too. We'd find this, if you want to use this word, pagan religions. In fact, we would all be pagan by this sort of example. So, because all religions evolve over time, and they come from something and evolved with understanding. It's like another thing that we have to pay attention to as well is different definitions of the said deity. There were Yahweh tribes fighting other Yahweh tribes and stealing their Yahweh statues while saying theirs were holy and theirs is not, and they're an offshoot of it. And then you had the same ones with El Elyon worship, example, even with ancient Egypt. So there's always different definitions of a god. So there's peaceful, loving versions of El that reject sacrifices, and then there's versions of El that accept sacrifices. We have versions of Yahweh that are very violent, and some that's very dualistic of both good and bad. We have Zeus as well, in some stories being different, being more evil than other stories. So Ares, for instance, in Greek mythology, he's more of a victim, but he's a hero in Roman mythology. But he has a questionable story within that Roman mythology. So, yeah, which is also a thing, because we would replicate the gods by our own actions and what we're seeing in the world. We would see kings being overthrown, being replaced by their sons, even inherited. That's why you see in Deuteronomy 32.8 of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Yahweh inherits Israel from El Elyon, the Most High God. We even have beliefs of Baal inheriting the kingdom of heaven within the Ugaritic text from El Elyon. So again, we also find this in the Sumerian belief with Enki and Lil. We're being replaced by their children, or that role would replace, and they would have this version of this god named after this god, but it'll be a different god or different trait, or that would be my supreme god, but a lesser god to you, for instance. That went on in the ancient past. So some gods were more elevated more than others within a said city or within a said culture. So regarding even El Elyon and even Yahweh worship, we don't just find this with the Canaanites, we also find this within the Hittites. So that's interesting. The Babylonian exile and indeed their culture would have impacted the Jewish people as they were conquered by them. Even Greeks impacted the Jewish faith as well, as they were also ruling over the Jewish people. In fact, we had Jewish messiahs that were fighting against Greeks before the Romans. So that's interesting. So again, there's always different variations of a religion. They always split. And that's why you see the more peaceful ones usually getting overthrown by these nastier ones, and in turn they share their ideology with these other religions, making them less violent. It's pretty interesting too.
Yeah, you know, I get the description of where this God came from is different from everybody.
Yeah.
But you've heard me say this plenty of times. Uh, what is considered the first civilization, according to what most people consider, is the Sumerians. Like some people will argue the Egyptians, which I will also argue. I just go off of the Sumerians because the Oxford University actually gives a definition of what a civilization is, and it does fit with the Sumerians, and it does make sense. So I can understand why they say that. But this is what I always say. So I'm gonna bring this up real quick because one thing that I always talk about is where did these gods come from? So when we talk about these gods, right, we know from um, the Sumerian time frame, which Shinar and Sumer means one and the same things. We also know that um, Mesopotamia is where we get the same thing as the Abrahamic faith. That's the facts, right? I always say, which God did Abraham pray to? Because obviously he started around somewhere between 2000 BC. Now that's right between the Sumerian and Akkadian civilization, and both the Sumerians and the Akkadians both believed in the Anuna slash the Anunnaki. It's actually a fact that the word Anuna is actually Sumerian, and the word Anunnaki is Akkadian. So that's facts, right? So Abraham knew who they were. It just depends on which God he chose to worship. But when I was reading the Oxford Handbook of Cuneiform Culture, which is this book right here, I have an actual presentation on how I talk about the Sumerians, talk about the Anuna slash the Anunnaki came from the depths of the sea rather than, uh, some planet that orbits our sun every 3,600 years. It actually says, according, and I'm going to read the whole thing. Matter of fact, Kalhu Apkallu was certainly also painted in antiquity, perhaps in a very similar way to the artist's construction. According to Mesopotamian tradition, these big fish are the companions of the god of wisdom, Enki slash Ea, who dwells in the depths of the sea. They regularly emerged from the sea in order to teach mankind the cornerstones of civilization, such as agriculture, kingship, justice, and writing. Before the flood ended their coexistence. And it tells you where to go get the information from. And it's the Oxford Handbook of Cuneiform
I
Culture.
just need to go to use the toilet quickly. 2 seconds, Tyrone. Sorry
Yeah,
to cut you
yeah.
off.
So, no, go ahead. So while he's gone, um, and I've talked to him about this plenty of times, is that I always say that the Anuna slash Anunnaki comes from planet Nibiru. That's what people always say. I always talk about that. But what I say is that the facts is that according to the cuneiform text, or at least the depictions at the bare minimum, they came from the depths of the seas. This is actually what is depicted. As you can see, it's actually a fish god in a fish suit. You got what's the god name? Oannes, and you have Inky Ea, who comes from this water, and then you also have, which I always like to compare to the Japanese myth with the lady who came from the waters in that little. I can't remember what kind of thing she came into. But I was just telling everybody that I talked to you about this plenty of times before you walked off, Nathan, and I was just telling them that, you know, um, when we talk about the gods from here from planet Earth, the Nuna slash Anunnaki, they came from the depths of the sea. It could be interpreted as, hollow Earth, inner Earth, whatever you want to call it. But this is actually what's in
Well,
their
this is a great
text.
text because this cornerstone was also carried on in Judaism
Mhm.
within the old prophets and then carried on by Jesus. I give a
Mhm.
meaning of this too. The cornerstone is what's been rejected. In these old days, we had the rivalries between the shepherds and the farmers. So the Sumerians were bringing the two together, the farmers and the growers, so also the farmers and the shepherds, because these two were at odds. Even in Egypt, a lot of Egyptians didn't like the shepherds because the shepherds were involved with the raiding parties that were raiding them. So, like the Saju and even Hyksos, which were also known as shepherds, they went out raiding. The Hyksos usurped the throne of Egypt. They were more civilized, and they would even adopt
Mhm.
Egyptian gods and Egyptian names as well, while most worshipping El Elyon, while the Sashi worship Yahweh. So what's being rejected is the cornerstone. So this is what builds civilization because they're rejecting the inner goodness and what can bring us together. So instead of rejecting one another, come together, and you got the secrets of civilization, basically. So not so much war, but coming together is what brings civilization. Otherwise, the civilization will tear in two. Civil war, for instance. So that's my little take on that one as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. It's so amazing to me because, like I said, there's so many interpretations. So you're a Gnostic Christian, and I've showed you the book that I was reading, the Lost Scriptures books. That this book right here, uh,
Wonderful book.
Lost Scriptures books that did not make it into the New Testament. We was talking about that. It's basically what people will consider the apocrypha and stuff, so on and so forth. And there's different. Yeah, you got it too. So yeah, perfect. And what's interesting in this book is that before I bought this book, I've already known about everything that was in this book, right? Like I knew that there were already stories. I didn't see the actual translations that was, accepted from a respected individual or reputable individual. So, um, but I bought this book, and I was like, okay, I heard this story. Okay, that's cool. I know that. Oh, I heard this story. Oh, cool. Okay, cool. That I know that. And what's amazing to me is that um, what I understand about Gnostics or Gnosticism is that it's just like Christianity in the sense, or Catholicism in the sense, or Islam in the sense, where you have different views on things, like Sunni and Shiites, right? They have different views of their own religion. And but is it safe to say that every Gnostic believes that there's a greater good out there, like there's something greater than what is portrayed within us?
Yeah, all Gnostics believe in the greater good, or we can do the greater good, whether you're an atheist Gnostic or a religious Gnostic or spiritual Gnostic.
Mm-hmm.
There's a concept of doing a greater good or the belief in the greater good, something within us. So Gnosticism really is about, true Gnostic path is about inward seeking. Gnostic Christianity is about inward seeking and being like Christ for yourself. So what makes the term Christian or Christanos is little anointed one or little Christ, someone in the pursuit of following the teachings of Jesus to become like. Now, that shouldn't be hard to think because even in the goal of, say, Judaism or Christianity, in turn was to be like one of the saints or prophets, or in turn to be ready to be an angel of God, depending on the sect, as not all Jews believed in angels. Now, not all Christians believe that in turn you would become an angel. Some believe you become like an angel. But the earlier belief is you become an angel, basically, or higher than the angels. So you're still an angel, just a bit higher. So there's higher levels of heaven as well. There are also beliefs that the angels did not like us, and they would try to guard the heavens to keep us out of it. And there was rituals to do in order to access that divine realm and even chants. And one of those chants, which is from old Merkaba mystics, carries on in a Saturday prayer that the Jewish people still use. I can tell you the name of it. I've got it saved in my phone. I think it's the El Adonai prayer. El Adonai prayer. I'll look it up. I'll double check just to make sure. I don't want to give people the
Yeah.
wrong.
While you're doing that, it's interesting to me because of the simple fact that you found it already.
Yeah, it's El Adon.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
El Adon prayer. It's more like a poem. So yeah, I'm all good, Tyron. I just mentioned it what it was.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh shoot, I forgot what I was going to say. It's interesting to me because of the simple fact that, like I said, there's different interpretations and understandings throughout there, and there are some people who can work together, and there are people who can't work together. And like I said, we was talking about this book, The Law of Scriptures, right here, and there are things in here that Jesus does that would be looked at as very not nice, and people won't believe it because they would think that, if he was sent by God, that he could do no wrong, but he was also a man. Some people would say he wasn't a God, that he was just a man, or some people say he was a son of God, or there's so many theories out there. I'm not going to get into it or whatnot, but the idea is that he came from a immaculate conception, and it's very interesting that to understand that not everybody holds the Virgin Mary as high as they should, even though she is the one who birthed Jesus in the first place. What's your take on that?
Well, the most honored women were not just Mary, but it was also Mary Magdalene, and it was mostly replaced by the mother. They say blessed is her womb, but she was a temple virgin that was replaced as the virgin. So Mary Magdalene holds a more special account. Why? Because she witnesses the raising of the Logos. She witnesses Christ raising up to become the one sitting at the right hand. So she's the first to witness the resurrection. That's why she was so important. So she chose to stay with Jesus where the disciples fled. And that's why he loved her more than the other disciples in the Gospel of Mary. And it's very likely the Gospel of John was replaced and put into John. But the thing is, the words he can also mean she in Greek. So aptos can mean anything. He, she, it, they, them, this one. So it changes the whole text. And texts are clearly being edited, and you can see different authors that are writing this text, choice of words. So the honoring was of Mary Magdalene, and before this, it was also of Sophia, or the feminine aspect of God, the Holy Spirit that proceeds from the Father. So the life-giving spirit. This is what was honored, the divine feminine. So you had the divine masculine, the divine feminine. And then you had Christ sitting at the right hand of the Father. So this is where the Trinity somewhat plays into play, becoming the Logos. So we had Christians say Simon Magus, who was baptized by Philip, a disciple of Jesus. He actually knew the disciples, and he wrote. So this is the only account we have for a fact from someone that knew the disciples, though we don't have that original text. We only have the quotation of it from the church fathers before they destroyed it, but they still kept it, which is interesting. So he had a different belief too. He recognized the divine feminine and the divine masculine, and that in humans were meant to come together to be reunited as one, basically. So a consort. So he had the belief of Sophia as well being the life-giving spirit, or falling into creation and having to be redeemed as the human soul would return. So this belief as well would also transition with the belief of the Logos replacing Moses as God's word, which is interesting in Simon Magus' belief. Then we go to the Carpocratian Gnostics, which are really the ones to say that invented the united Trinity as we know it, except their united Trinity being one was Theos, the monad being God, the Logos being God's word, Jesus, and Zoe being the life-giving spirit, Sophia, the Holy Spirit. So that would also transition, which is also interesting. So the most honoring would go to, in female-wise, would be to Mary Magdalene, being the first to witness the raising of the Christ. Because Jesus even states, and this is what some people even say is shocking, and it probably would have even hurt his mother's feelings, those who do the works of my Father are my mother, are my sisters, are my brothers. So he's saying that she's not his only mother. He's also recognizing a divine feminine mother, so being the earth as well, if you want to call it this as well, which goes into the Ebionites, which had a very different concept. So within Gnostic Christianity and Jewish Christianity, we have the honoring of the divine femme. being recognized as a feminine aspect of God, and thus male and female being in the image of God. That is beyond gender, beyond sex. That's why we have two creation stories. One male and female coming together, and the other one, which was Yahweh traditions, a later legend, not as old as the first one, which is El Elyon worship. Yahweh has males being created first because they were male dominated. They were a male dominated religion. Women were second citizens to them because they went out raiding for women, taking them as slaves. The Sashu, you see them with mixed cultures. And this is the Canaanites too. You see them as also copper skinned, and even if you want to call it Caucasian, and mixed in with black skinned, if you want to, whatever you want to call it. Who gives a shit? So where it all comes from is from their raiding. They were raiding people from different tribes. They didn't discriminate. They were taking women, and they all mixed together. Egypt, however, good on these guys. They mixed because they wanted to mix. They invited people, say, come over here, come join us. That's awesome. You know, super cool. So I like that. So Egyptians get 10 stars for that. So the Canaanites.
Yeah, they were very mixture types of individuals. That's why a lot of people don't understand who they were originally.
Yeah. Like they even invited Celtic mercenaries over because they liked the look of their women as well, and they thought they liked their culture. So they said, come over here, we want to marry your women. You can take some of our women too. Then those Celtic mercenaries tried to usurp the Egyptian throne, but it got put down and they failed, which is very interesting as well. But the Canaanites, in regarding to them, they did not discriminate in who they took as slaves. So they took everyone. Where if you go to, say, in the early Germanic periods of the Neolithic area, so Neolithic era, my bad. So this is before the Germanic tribes of what we know. This is early humans I'm talking about now. They selectively picked on who they would mix with because they went out and raided, and they took one group of women while killing all the rest, which is trippy. So they selectively were breeding. And this would carry on with the Anglo-Saxons, which invaded Britain. They didn't want to mix with the Celtics. They were forbidding it. But some broke away, mixing and making their own kingdoms, even fighting other Anglo-Saxons and other Celts. So we have Celtic. Sorry, is his name Celtic? Or Sir, I forgot his name. It starts with, I think it's Celtic. Founder of Wessex. I might have that name wrong. I used to be very familiar with all the Anglo-Saxon history. So he had a son as well. So I might be mixing up the son's name and the father's. But the founder of what became the Anglo-Saxons of Wessex, he has a Celtic name, but he's meant to be Anglo-Saxon. So it's likely what is going on here. He was a Celtic that invited in Anglo-Saxon mercenaries, mixed in, and making his own hybrid culture, which would eventually become the Anglo-Saxons there. So they weren't just violent raidings. They were mixing too. And that one became more superior than the other tribes because other tribes didn't want to mix. So he had a force of both Brythonic people and Germanic people, which is interesting. Some even state that he was killed by King Arthur. So that's interesting when you come across that as well. So it wasn't so much the idea of skin color back then. No, it was your culture, different gods. They didn't want to mix or taint their gods. That was what it was. So it was religious reasons. That changes the story of our evolution as well. And of course, the evolution of religion. So it shows that religious wars have existed for a very, 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 very long time.
Yeah. So, because we're about at the hour mark.
Yeah.
And this is about how long we keep our discussions. And I was just looking at because you had said something earlier, and I had wrote it down. I got it right here on the sheet because my Kindle's dead right now, so I got to use a piece of sheet of paper. Let me actually see what exactly what I said where I made it. Okay, so you was talking about like the and you could have been discussing this about other things too, about the temples and stuff like that, and how all these gods are like these temples are worshipped through certain temples, and every god has their own temple, and so on and so forth, and every temple has their own what they would call their Virgin Marys, right? And when I was reading this book, this one right here, um, the idea that these these Virgin Marys were chosen at as a young age to work at these temples is astonishing to me because I don't know many people today at this day and age, at least in 2025, that would have their kids working at the church, whatever, whether it's a Baptist church or a Mormon church or whatever type of church, they wouldn't be spending their time in there. But I also know that churches at that time was a place for education, also where they taught people how to read and write. Like I've read forbidden books about how uh, when Jesus was young and he was going through his phases of trying to master his I guess you could say his abilities, I guess you could say, different people, such as I guess you could call them scholars, would come up to Joseph and say, "Hey, let me take your son for a few days to teach him, or for a certain amount of time to teach him how to read and write, so I can teach him how to be a better person," and so on and so forth. But then when they got Jesus, he flipped the script on them basically and asked them questions that they couldn't answer. And so they got so embarrassed that they had to give him back to Joseph. And one of the things that I found that you say interesting is that you was talking about Gnostics and Gnosis and stuff. Well, let's go back to the origins and understanding of what Gnostic and Gnosis is. It just means knowledge. So, of course, everybody's going to have different ideas and information based off the knowledge that they have, right? Because of the information that they are given, right? Or the information that they seek. For instance, like I said, we can't read every single book, so obviously there's stuff that you know that I don't know, and then obviously there's stuff that I know that you don't know. But that doesn't mean that we're greater than either one of us. We can take what we both know that we what we don't know, and give it to each other, where we both can come up to a better understanding of what is. And like you said that all Gnostics believe that there is a greater good, a greater being out there. There's something greater than us out there, obviously, right? I believe that too because I know that I'm not the smartest person out there. So obviously, there's somebody that's smarter than me. I know I'm not the fastest running person out there. I know there's somebody that can run faster than me. I know my place in this world. But one thing that I know that I am good at is being me, who I am, looking within who I am that Jesus told us to be. I can't be like anybody else and nobody can be like me. I can only be like who I am and others can be only be who they are. And it's up to us to make that into an experience for ourselves. That's why we all have different experiences and we understand different things, interpret things differently, and so on and so forth. Um, but me as a Gnostic, I feel like just recently I'm starting to believe that I feel like I'm more edged on the Gnostic side of things. I know you told me that before plenty of times. You kept saying, "Yeah, you're a Gnostic rebirth. You're a Gnostic." I never really understood what I was, and I understand Gnosticism is also a religion too. It's just not a religion in the sense of Christianity and so on and so forth. And there's different Gnostics out there. Like you say, you're a Gnostic Christian. That just means that you believe in Jesus. You just understand who Jesus is from the knowledge perspective, other than what's written in the Bible, meaning that you understand what's not written in the Bible. So you know that you know what's in the Bible, but you also know what's not written in the Bible, which makes you a Gnostic Christian, a knowledgeable Christian, right? So um, I understand that. And I understand that for myself too, because of the simple fact that I just recently just started thinking, like, man, what is my expertise? And I was like, I know a lot about religion, and I know a lot about the Sumerians. And there's only but so much you can learn about the Sumerians. Like, it doesn't make you any better if you can translate the text for yourself or not, right? Because just because you can translate the text, does that mean you understand the text? It's the same
Mhm.
thing as just because you read something, do you comprehend what you've read, right? Just because you read something, do you understand what the hell was written to you, right? So I take into understanding that even though I'm trying to learn the language for myself, I understand that I won't understand truly the true knowledge of what the Sumerians said because it's somebody's interpretation of what they understood. And many people went ahead and rode the train after that. Yeah, they that words could mean different things, but understanding how these people lived is the whole different story. What can you give me other than what the Sumerians said? And we don't really know what the Sumerians said in the first place, right? We just know what some people wrote down based off of what they were told to write down when they was in school. And I give you an example of this. When I learned about the Mesopotamians and how they had schools, those cuneiform tablets that we find are mostly found in places like as libraries or some place where they were teaching people how to read and write. And that means they found thousands of the same tablets. And even though somebody was teaching somebody how to read and write, that doesn't mean that the person wrote anything clearly. Share your handles one quick chance right before we end it, so everybody can know where to find your stuff at.
Yeah, you can find me on Spiritual Level Being on YouTube and on the Gnostic Union on YouTube and on Facebook. And there you can even ask Tyrone to point you in my direction as well. And we also accept courses, so you can read my actual translations of the Gospels, which have been denied to many of the people. Unfortunately, it has been mistranslated. The Bible itself has got spelling mistakes in it, so you have to make sense of that. So I have the original Greek. I ask you to study my translations. If you really want to delve into the original Greek, go for it. You can match my translations. That's what it's there for. And if you roll with us, me and Tyrone do a couple of chats with us for about, say, a year, I'll make you a bishop. And you can go from there and bring other people into the fold as well. So thank you for having me too, Tyrone, as well. It's always a pleasure talking with you.
I appreciate it, bro. Like I said, man, it's always an honor to have a discussion with you. Of course, we had this one kind of late, but I guarantee you a lot of people want to watch this when they wake up because they always tell me they do and they enjoy it, our conversations and everything that we share. So I'm going to end the stream now. I appreciate everybody for thinking out. Thanks again.